Space is usually sold as humanity's cleanest dream. Shiny rockets, brave astronauts, noble music, and everyone pretending the bathroom works. But behind the heroic posters, space history is full of panic, poison, fire, blindness, mystery noises, dead satellites, and decisions so reckless they sound like they were approved by a sleep-deprived raccoon in a lab coat. These are the most disturbing moments in the history of space. 1. Apollo 10 was supposed to be a classy rehearsal for landing on the moon. Serious men, serious mission, serious checklists. And then, somewhere in lunar orbit, a piece of human waste started floating through the cabin like the most cursed satellite ever launched by NASA. The crew suddenly began debating whose gift was drifting around in zero gravity, and the audio became less like heroic space exploration and more like three roommates discovering something horrifying in the kitchen sink. Nobody wanted to claim it. Nobody wanted to admit anything. These were elite test pilots orbiting the moon, and for a moment their mission turned into CSI bathroom failure. It is funny because they survived, but also disturbing because this tiny spacecraft was their entire world. No open window, no escape. Just three men, one mystery object, and the brutal truth that humanity reached for the stars before fully defeating plumbing. 2. Sergei Krikalev went into space as a Soviet cosmonaut and came back to Earth after the Soviet Union had basically rage-quit history. In 1991, he was living aboard the Mir space station, while the country beneath him collapsed into new borders, new governments, new flags, and one giant administrative migraine. Imagine leaving for a work trip, and your employer ceases to exist while you are still in the hotel elevator. Krikalev's return was delayed because money, politics, and post-Soviet chaos turned a space mission into the world's most extreme scheduling problem. He spent 311 days in orbit, circling Earth while everyone below tried to figure out who owned what, who paid whom, and who was supposed to bring him home. He was not literally abandoned like a forgotten suitcase, but the situation was absurdly close. Most people worry their flight home gets delayed. Krikalev's pickup got delayed by the collapse of a superpower. 3. Jake Garn was a United States senator who wanted to experience space, and in 1985, NASA finally let him ride aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. This sounds noble until his stomach entered the chat and immediately declared war on the mission. Garn suffered such intense space motion sickness that astronauts later joked about measuring nausea in garns. One garn became the imaginary maximum level of human vomiting in orbit. That is an incredible legacy. Some senators get bridges named after them. This man got a unit of cosmic nausea. To be fair, space adaptation syndrome is real, and even tough, trained people can feel awful when the inner ear realizes up, down, and dignity have all been cancelled. But Garn's case became legendary because it was so spectacularly miserable. Space did not kill him. It just humbled him with the elegance of a washing machine full of soup. 4. Luca Parmitano's 2013 spacewalk sounds like a nightmare invented by someone who hates both water and space. While outside the International Space Station, water began leaking into his helmet. Not a little cinematic droplet on the visor. Enough water to cover his eyes, ears, and nose, slowly turning his spacesuit into the worst possible aquarium. On Earth, water runs down. In microgravity, it clings to your face like a villain with no respect for personal boundaries. Parmitano could not simply wipe it away. He was outside the station, partially blind, attached to the structure, trying not to inhale floating blobs of water while mission control guided him back. The universe had already invented vacuum, radiation, freezing, overheating, and micrometeoroids. But apparently someone in the Cosmic Complaints Department said, "What if we also make drowning possible in space?" He survived, but the incident was a brutal reminder that even a tiny leak can turn orbit into a trap. 5. The Viking landers reached Mars in the 1970s, carrying experiments designed to answer the biggest question imaginable: is there life on Mars? The official result was cautious and frustrating, no confirmed life. But one disturbing possibility has been haunting the discussion ever since. Some scientists argue that Viking may have triggered reactions that looked biological, then accidentally destroyed whatever fragile Martian microbes might have been there. One theory suggests that adding water or heating the soil could have killed organisms adapted to a dry, hostile environment. That would be peak humanity. We finally meet alien life, immediately pour the wrong thing on it, bake it in a science oven, and then say, "Strange, it is not alive anymore." To be clear, this is still debated, not proven, but as historical what-ifs go, it is deliciously uncomfortable. Mars may not have been empty. Maybe our first handshake was a laboratory accident. 6. Yang Liwei, China's first astronaut, heard a sound during his 2003 Shenzhou 5 flight that would make any normal person start negotiating with whatever gods handles spacecraft noises. He described it as a knocking sound, like a wooden hammer hitting an iron bucket. That is unsettling enough in an apartment building. In orbit, when you are alone inside a capsule surrounded by vacuum, it becomes nightmare fuel wearing a headset. There was no person outside, no helpful mechanic tapping the hull. Just space, silence, and the occasional cosmic reminder that your metal can is under stress. Later explanations pointed to ordinary causes like thermal expansion, vibrations, and the spacecraft structure reacting to temperature changes. Very reasonable, very scientific. Still, imagine hearing knock-knock outside your spacecraft and being expected to respond like a calm professional instead of screaming, "Nobody is home, especially not me." 7. Skylab 4 is often described as the first strike in space, which is such a beautiful phrase it should come with tiny Union banners floating in zero gravity. The popular story says the crew became so exhausted by NASA's packed schedule that they switched off radio contact and took a day for themselves. The real version is less cartoonish, but still revealing. The astronauts were overloaded, communication with mission control became tense, and the schedule treated human beings a little too much like very expensive floating printers. They had to renegotiate workload, rest, and expectations while trapped in a laboratory above Earth. That is the disturbing part. Space agencies had mastered rockets, fuel, orbital mechanics, and docking, but they were still learning that humans cannot be optimized like a spreadsheet cell. Even in orbit, burnout can climb through the hatch, sit beside you and say, "Nice station. Shame if we filled every minute with tasks." 8. Ham the chimpanzee became famous as a space pioneer after his 1961 flight, and the photos after splashdown seem to show him smiling. For decades, that image looked cute. Little space chimp, happy survivor, adorable Cold War mascot. Then, primatologists ruined the party by explaining that this smile was probably a fear grimace. In chimpanzee behavior, that expression can signal stress, not joy. Suddenly, the heroic publicity photo becomes much darker. Ham had been strapped into a capsule, launched on a rocket, shaken, accelerated, splashed down, and dragged into a human celebration he could not possibly understand. Early space programs often used animals before risking people, and those animals paid with terror, confusion, and sometimes death. Ham survived and became a symbol, but the image is no longer just charming. It is a reminder that before humans got their grand space adventure, other creatures got the terrifying beta version. 9. During a 2001 spacewalk, astronaut Robert Curbeam got covered in frozen ammonia leaking from the International Space Station's cooling system. This is not the kind of snow day anyone wants. Ammonia is toxic, and Curbeam's spacesuit suddenly became contaminated with glittery poison crystals. The problem was not only that he was outside in vacuum wearing a suit dusted with hazardous chemicals. The bigger issue was that if he rushed back inside, he could bring ammonia into the station and endanger the crew. So the solution was deeply strange and very space program. Stay outside, get brushed off, and let sunlight bake the poison away. Imagine mission control saying, "We would love to let you in, but first please stand in direct sunlight until you stop being a toxic snowman." He survived, and the procedure worked, but the incident proves space can turn ordinary industrial maintenance into the most expensive hazardous materials incident in human history. 10. The Voyager. Golden Record is beautiful, hopeful, poetic, and just a tiny bit like handing your home address to the dark forest and saying, "We trust everyone here, right?" It carries music, greetings, images, and information about Earth, designed as a message from humanity to whoever might one day find it. The cover includes a pulsar map showing how to locate the solar system. Scientists understood the odds are ridiculously small. Space is huge, Voyager is tiny, and any alien civilization finding it would already be very advanced. Still, the idea makes the paranoid corner of the human brain start sweating. We sent a cosmic introduction package into deep space with directions back to the planet where we keep all our water, oxygen, arguments, and snacks. It is probably harmless. It is definitely inspiring. But if aliens ever arrive with bad manners, someone will stare at that record and whisper, "Who mailed the invitation?" 11. Voskhod 2 gave humanity its first spacewalk and then immediately turned the return home into a survival movie. After Alexei Leonov walked outside the spacecraft, he and Pavel Belyayev re-entered Earth's atmosphere and landed far from the planned zone, deep in the snowy Soviet taiga. Rescue helicopters spotted them, but the forest was too dense for an easy pickup. So the two cosmonauts, who had just survived vacuum, manual re-entry, and a mission full of technical drama, now had to wait in freezing wilderness where wolves and bears were a real concern. That is almost insulting. Space tries to kill you, then Earth says, "My turn." They spent cold nights in the forest until rescuers reached them. It is one of those stories that shows early spaceflight was not just rockets and metals, it was also landing in the wrong snow-covered nightmare and hoping the local wildlife respected scientific achievement. 12. Skylab carried spiders into orbit because apparently humans looked at space and said, "You know what this needs? Webs." Two spiders, Arabella and Anita, were sent to see if they could spin webs in microgravity. At first, the results were strange and uneven, like the spiders had taken a sudden interest in experimental horror architecture. Without gravity, even a spider had to recalibrate its entire tiny worldview. Over time, Arabella adapted and produced more complete webs, which is impressive and also slightly offensive, because she solved zero gravity faster than many humans solve printer settings. The darker internet version sometimes turns this into full orbital cannibalism, but the confirmed story is already creepy enough. A space station is supposed to be clean, mechanical, and rational. Add floating spiders and distorted webs, and suddenly the whole thing feels like a haunted attic traveling around Earth at thousands of miles per hour. 13. Chris Hadfield once went temporarily blind during a spacewalk because anti-fog solution got into his eye. That is the kind of tiny problem that would be annoying in a bathroom mirror and absolutely horrifying when your bathroom mirror is attached to the outside of the International Space Station. In gravity, tears run down your face and help wash irritants away. In microgravity, they form floating blobs that cling to your eyes like angry little jellyfish. The liquid spread, and Hadfield lost vision while outside the station, holding on to humanity's most expensive metal workplace above Earth. Mission control helped him work through it, and airflow eventually cleared the problem. But the situation is terrifying because it was so small. Not a meteor, not an explosion, not alien sabotage, just a bit of fluid in the wrong place. Space does not need drama to become dangerous. Sometimes it just weaponizes basic hygiene. 14. In 2019, Israel's Bereshit lunar lander crashed into the moon while carrying a lunar archive that reportedly included thousands of tardigrades. Tardigrades, also known as water bears, are microscopic creatures famous for surviving extreme cold, radiation, dehydration, and basically everything except being invited to normal dinner parties. After the crash, people asked whether humanity had accidentally scattered tiny Earth survivors across the moon. The likely answer is less dramatic. Without liquid water, they would remain dormant, and many may not have survived the impact at all. Still, the image is outrageous. We spent decades worrying about contaminating other worlds, then possibly delivered freeze-dried microanimals to the lunar surface through a crash landing. Not exactly elegant. If aliens ever audit our space program, this will be difficult to explain. Yes, we visited the moon. Also, we may have sprinkled it with sleeping microscopic bears. Long story. 15. The Dzhanibekov effect sounds like a Soviet campfire story told by engineers who have not slept in 3 days, but it is real physics. Cosmonaut Vladimir Dzhanibekov noticed that a spinning wingnut in weightlessness would suddenly flip 180 degrees while continuing to move. It looked impossible, like the object briefly remembered a different personality. The explanation is the tennis racket theorem. Rotation around an intermediate axis can be unstable, causing an object to flip. That is the polite scientific version. The visual version is, the nut got possessed by mathematics. Online legends claim the Soviet Union hid the effect because some people feared Earth might flip the same way. That part is not reliable, and Earth is not a loose nut floating through a space station. But the effect still feels disturbing because it shows how space turns ordinary objects into weird little physics demons. Even a bolt can become dramatic when gravity leaves the room. 16. Voskhod 1 was the kind of space race decision that makes you respect the cosmonauts and side-eye the managers. The Soviet Union wanted the first multi-person crew in orbit, so engineers packed 3 men into a capsule based on a design that was already cramped. To make them fit, they removed the pressure suits. Not the extra snacks. Not the luxury armrests, because there were no luxury armrests. The suits. These men flew in ordinary clothing, meaning a cabin leak would have been instantly catastrophic. There was also no launch escape system in the way later crews would expect. The mission succeeded, so the risk was celebrated as triumph instead of being framed as, we nearly turned 3 men into a patriotic, cautionary tale. Space history often looks heroic from the outside, but sometimes the paperwork behind the heroism reads like someone dared reality to blink first. 17. The International Space Station is not a sterile temple of science. It is full of humans, and humans are basically warm bags of bacteria with Wi-Fi problems. Microbes ride into orbit on skin, clothes, equipment, food, and every surface astronauts touch. Once aboard, they live in a closed environment with radiation, microgravity, recycled air, and constant stress. Studies have found that some microbes behave differently in space, and certain strains have shown resistance traits that scientists monitor carefully. This does not mean the station is crawling with movie monsters or that a fungus is quietly applying to command the mission. But it does mean our invisible passengers adapt, and space may change how they grow, spread, or respond to medicine. That is deeply uncomfortable. We imagine astronauts exploring the cosmos alone, noble and brave. In reality, they bring a microscopic entourage. Humanity went to space, and our germs immediately asked about housing. 18. Alexei Leonov's first spacewalk was historic, beautiful, and almost ended with him trapped outside his spacecraft because his suit inflated in the vacuum. His spacesuit became stiff and swollen, making movement brutally difficult. When he tried to return through the airlock, he realized he might not fit properly. Imagine being the first human to float freely above Earth, then discovering your heroic spacesuit has turned into an overfilled parade balloon with a person inside. Leonov made a dangerous decision. He vented pressure from the suit to make it flexible enough to re-enter. That increased risk, but staying outside was not exactly a comfortable alternative. He was overheating, sweating, exhausted, and working against time in an environment that does not forgive embarrassment. The public version was clean and glorious. The real version was closer to a man wrestling his own life support system while the planet watched from far below. 19. Apollo 10 astronauts heard strange whistling sounds while they were on the far side of the moon, cut off from direct contact with Earth. The sound has been described as eerie space music, which is exactly the kind of phrase that turns a technical audio issue into a ghost story with a NASA badge. The likely explanation was radio interference between spacecraft systems, especially between the command module and lunar module. Reasonable, logical, boring in the way engineers love and horror fans hate. But now imagine actually being there. Earth is hidden behind the moon. Nobody at home can speak to you in real time. Outside the window is the dead gray surface of another world. Then a strange whistling enters your headset. At that point, even if you know it is probably interference, some ancient part of your brain is already writing a resignation letter to space. 20. The myth says Apollo astronauts carried cyanide pills in case they were stranded on the moon. It sounds dramatic, secretive, and very Cold War spy thriller with helmets. But evidence for actual NASA cyanide pills is weak. The darker reality is that space does not need a poison pill to be terrifying. If astronauts had been hopelessly stranded, the possible endings were already brutal. Oxygen running out, carbon dioxide building up, dehydration, temperature problems, or depressurization. No cinematic capsule required. The moon is not a desert where someone might wander over with a rescue jeep. It is a dead world, and if the return system failed, there was no backup taxi waiting behind a crater. NASA focused on preventing that scenario, not creating a neat dramatic exit. The disturbing truth is simpler. In space, being trapped is its own death sentence. The universe does not need props. 21. In February 1996, a Long March 3B rocket launched from Xichang, China, veered off course shortly after liftoff and crashed near a populated area. The official death toll was 6, with dozens injured, but outside observers and later accounts have questioned whether the real number was higher. Because access and reporting were tightly controlled, the full scale remains disputed. That uncertainty is part of the horror. Rocket disasters are often discussed like technical failures: guidance error, fuel, structure, telemetry. But when a launch vehicle falls into or near a community, the story is not just engineering. It becomes homes, families, witnesses, and unanswered questions. There is no punchline here. The disturbing part is the imbalance of power. Space programs chase national prestige, satellite contracts, and headlines, while ordinary people near launch sites may carry risks they never chose and may never see fully acknowledged. 22. Apollo astronauts reported seeing flashes of light even with their eyes closed. If that sounds like a ghost story, congratulations, the scientific explanation is somehow worse. The likely cause was high-energy cosmic particles passing through the eye or visual system and triggering the sensation of light. In normal human language, radiation from space was punching through their bodies hard enough for their brains to say, "Did someone just turn on a tiny lamp inside my skull?" Imagine trying to sleep on the way to the moon, closing your eyes, and still seeing sparks because invisible particles from deep space are passing through your face. For short Apollo missions, this was not considered a mission-ending emergency, but it revealed a major truth about leaving Earth's protective magnetic shield. Space is not empty. It is full of invisible, high-speed nonsense, and your body is apparently part of the experiment whether you signed the form or not. 23. The wow signal is one of the greatest cosmic "what was that" moments ever recorded. In 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio picked up a powerful narrowband signal from the direction of Sagittarius. Astronomer Jerry Eamon saw the printout and wrote "wow" beside it, accidentally giving history its most relatable scientific annotation. The signal had some features people would expect from an artificial source, which immediately made everyone's imagination put on a little alien hat. But it never repeated. Not once. That is what makes it maddening. If it was extraterrestrial intelligence, it basically rang the doorbell and ran away. If it was natural or human-made interference, nobody has proven the explanation in a way that closes the case completely. The disturbing part is not that aliens definitely called us. They probably did not. It is that the universe occasionally drops one perfect weird clue and then refuses to answer follow-up emails. 24. Spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome is one of those medical terms that sounds polite until you realize it means space can mess with astronauts' eyes. In microgravity, fluids shift upward toward the head. Faces get puffy, pressure changes around the eyes and optic nerves, and some astronauts experience vision problems, including flattening at the back of the eyeball. The body, apparently, was built with gravity in mind and becomes confused when gravity leaves the meeting. Long missions can lead to changes that persist after return, which is a serious concern for future Mars travel. Everyone loves imagining brave explorers stepping onto red soil, planting flags, and making dramatic speeches. Meanwhile, their eyeballs may be quietly saying, "We were not consulted." It is disturbing because it is not flashy. No explosion, no alarm. Just the slow realization that the human body treats space less like a destination and more like a legal complaint. 25. The 1997 fire aboard the Mir space station was 14 minutes of pure dread in a sealed metal habitat where just go outside was not a useful plan. A solid fuel oxygen generator malfunctioned, producing flames, sparks, molten material, and thick smoke. Fire is terrifying anywhere, but in orbit it becomes personal. There is no fresh air outside the door. There is no sidewalk. There is no fire truck climbing a ladder from Kazakhstan. Worse, the flame blocked access to one of the Soyuz escape vehicles, meaning the crew had to fight the fire while also facing the possibility that their lifeboat route was compromised. They used masks and extinguishers in a station filling with smoke, knowing every breath depended on the same environment the fire was poisoning. They survived, but Mir's fire showed that a space station can go from scientific outpost to locked room emergency terrifyingly fast. 26. Scott Kelly spent nearly a year aboard the International Space Station, while his identical twin brother Mark stayed on Earth, which gave NASA a rare scientific gift: one twin in space, one twin at home, and a giant biological comparison project. Then the headlines arrived and started behaving badly. Some claimed 7% of Scott's DNA had changed, which made it sound like he returned as a new species, possibly with glowing eyes and strong opinions about moon rocks. That is not accurate. His genetic code was not rewritten into Spaceman 2. What changed were patterns of gene expression and other biological markers, including immune responses, telomeres, inflammation, and metabolism. Many changes returned toward normal after he came home, while some effects lingered longer. The real story is still disturbing without turning him into a comic book origin story. Space can alter how the body functions at a molecular level, and it does not ask permission first. 27. The Nedelin catastrophe of 1960 was one of the deadliest disasters in rocket history, and it was hidden for decades. During preparations for a test of the Soviet R-16 missile at Baikonur, the second-stage engine ignited while the missile was still on the launch pad. The explosion killed large numbers of military officers, engineers, and technicians who had been gathered dangerously close under intense political pressure to finish quickly. Estimates vary, but many accounts place the death toll above 100. The Soviet government covered it up, claiming Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin had died in a plane crash. This is not a story that needs comedy. It is a brutal warning about what happens when fear, propaganda, deadlines, and dangerous technology are forced into the same space. The victims were not cartoon fools standing too close to fire. They were people trapped inside a system where saying stop could be harder than obeying catastrophe. 28. NASA's black hole sonification from the Perseus galaxy cluster sounds like the universe found a haunted church organ and decided to practice at midnight. To be clear, this is not literal sound recorded by a microphone floating beside a black hole. Space is not full of air, and microphones do not casually survive next to cosmic monsters. Scientists took pressure waves detected in hot gas around the black hole and shifted them upward many octaves so human ears could hear the pattern. So it is real data turned into sound, not a monster moaning into a studio mic. Still, the result is deeply unsettling. It rumbles and groans like reality itself has indigestion. Black holes were already terrifying enough as objects that trap light and warp space-time. Giving one an audio track feels excessive, like adding creepy violin music to a shark. Science is educational, yes, but sometimes science also knows exactly how to ruin your sleep. 29. Gus Grissom survived a frightening emergency after his 1961 Mercury flight, then died years later in the Apollo 1 fire. After Liberty Bell 7 splashdown, the hatch blew unexpectedly, and seawater rushed into the capsule. It began sinking, and Grissom struggled in the ocean as his suit lost buoyancy. He was rescued, but the capsule disappeared beneath the waves. For years, some unfairly questioned whether he had triggered the hatch himself, which is a spectacularly cruel thing to attach to a man who had just nearly drowned after completing a dangerous mission. In 1967, Grissom died with Ed White and Roger Chaffee during a ground test for Apollo 1. A pure oxygen atmosphere, flammable materials, and a hatch that could not be opened quickly turned the capsule into a fatal trap. His story is disturbing because it shows how early astronauts carried risk not just in space, but even while sitting on the pad. 30. Soyuz 11 remains the only mission where humans died in space itself, above the recognized boundary of space. In 1971, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev had completed a historic stay aboard Salyut 1, the world's first space station. Their return should have been a triumph. Instead, a valve opened during descent preparations, causing the capsule to depressurize. The crew were not wearing pressure suits because the spacecraft was too cramped for all 3 men in suits. By the time the capsule landed automatically, recovery crews had already noticed the terrible silence over radio. When they opened the hatch, all 3 cosmonauts were dead in their seats. Reports described signs consistent with catastrophic decompression and oxygen loss. Afterward, Soyuz procedures changed so crews would wear pressure suits during critical phases. There is no way to make this lighter, and it should not be made lighter. The lesson was written in human lives. 31. Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto in 1930, and decades after his death, a portion of his ashes was placed aboard NASA's New Horizons spacecraft. That means the man who found Pluto has, in a very literal and very strange way, traveled past it. It is beautiful, poetic, and also slightly chilling. Most people get a grave, an urn, maybe a respectful plaque. Tombaugh got launched beyond the outer planets like the final boss of memorial services. New Horizons flew past Pluto in 2015 and continued into the Kuiper Belt, carrying his remains farther than any traditional human burial could ever dream of going. The idea is moving, but it also makes your brain pause. Somewhere out there, a dead astronomer is riding a silent machine through the cold edge of the solar system. Humanity looked at death and said, "What if we made it interplanetary?" Honestly, that is both touching and deeply weird. 32. Vladimir Komarov's death aboard Soyuz 1 in 1967 is surrounded by one of the darkest legends in space history, that he cursed Soviet leaders over the radio before crashing to Earth. That version is dramatic, but historians treat some of the most famous details cautiously. The confirmed story is already grim enough. Soyuz 1 had serious problems after launch, including a failed solar panel and control difficulties. Komarov fought to stabilize the spacecraft and bring it home. During landing, the parachute system failed, and the capsule slammed into the ground at devastating speed. The wreckage burned so badly that images from the aftermath became some of the most haunting in the history of spaceflight. The real horror is not whether every alleged final word is authentic. It is that political pressure and technical problems pushed a dangerous mission forward, and Komarov was left alone inside the consequences. Some myths make history louder. This one did not need help. 33. Challenger remains one of the most painful disasters in space history because it unfolded in front of millions, including schoolchildren watching a teacher go to space. On January 28, 1986, the shuttle broke apart 73 seconds after launch after an O-ring failure in the right solid rocket booster, made worse by cold weather. People often call it an explosion, but the crew cabin separated from the vehicle and continued upward before falling into the Atlantic. NASA's later analysis found that at least some emergency air packs had been activated, suggesting that crew members survived the initial breakup. Whether they remained conscious until ocean impact is uncertain, and that uncertainty is almost unbearable. The cabin hit the water about 2 minutes and 45 seconds after breakup. Challenger was not just a technical failure. It was a failure of warnings ignored, pressure accepted, and risk normalized until the machine finally collected its debt. Some disasters shock because nobody saw them coming. This one is worse because some people did. So yes, space is inspiring. It is also a freezing, silent murder room where even water, soap, bacteria, and loose bolts can become enemies. Now I want the comments to get ugly in the best way. What disturbing space moment did we leave out that absolutely deserved a place here? Not maybe this one. I mean the one so obvious you are already annoyed it was missing. Drop it below, defend your pick like Mission Control is watching, and if this video made space feel slightly less romantic, hit like and subscribe before the universe finds another way to humble us.